Alright, Karina baby, for the fourth, we have fair share. Fair share. There are some selfish girls and boys who never want to share their toys or offer up a fudge or two, which kinder children often do. I know an awful little tot who sat alone and ate a lot of sticky, creamy chocolate cake, the one he'd watched his mother bake. He never thought to leave his slice for family, friends, or kitchen mice, but ate up every single crumb as greedily he filled his tum, until he looked quite pale and sick, and called the doctor. Please come quick. The doctor came and shook his head and sent the greedy child to bed. Next time he said, "There is some cake, just eat your share, for goodness sake." Alright, that is fair share. One time that you didn't want to share your toys with our neighbor and your friend, Rosie was at our house and you decided to take your toys away from her. And I told you that if you didn't share your toys, Mama was going to take all the toys away from you as well. That you'd have no toys. So you turned around, you picked up some toys, and you go, I share, and you started sharing your toys with Rosie. It was so adorable, baby, and I love that you learned so quickly that you do have to share. Mama's a twin, so it's easy for me to share everything I have because I've been sharing my entire life. And just like I've been trying to teach you your entire life, you do have to share. This world is meant to be shared. Today's story is The Little Mermaid. Far out at sea, the water is as blue as bluest cornflower, and as clear as the clearest crystal, but is very deep, deeper than any anchor cable can fathom. Many church steeples would have to be piled on top of one another to reach from the very bottom to the surface of the water. And down in the depths lived the sea folk. Now don't imagine for a moment that there is nothing but bare white sand on the bed of the ocean. No, the most fantastic trees and flowers grow there, and all kinds of fishes, big and small. Flit in and out among the branches, just as birds do in the air up here. At the very lowest depth stands the palace of the Sea King. The walls are made of coral, and the high pointed windows of the clearest amber. But the roof is made of mussel shells which open and close with the gentle motion of the water. It is a wonderful sight, for every mussel shell containing gleaming pearls, any single one of which would be the perfect ornament for the queen's crown. The Sea King had been a widower for many years, but his old mother kept house for him. She was very intelligent, although proud of her noble birth, and that is why she went about with 12 oysters on her tail. Well, the other high-born ladies were allowed just 6. Apart from this, she desired a great deal of praise because she was so fond of her grandchildren, the princesses. They were 6 beautiful little girls, but the youngest was the prettiest of them all. Her skin was as clear and delicate as a rose petal. Her eyes were as blue as the deepest seas, but like the other mermaids, she had no feet, only a fishtail. All day long they used to play down in the palace in a great galleries where living flowers grew out of the walls. When the tall amber windows were opened, fishes swam in just as swallows fly into our rooms. when we open the windows, but the fishes swarm right up to the little princesses, ate from their hand, and allowed themselves to be patted. Outside the palace, there was a large garden with trees of fiery red and deep blue, their fruits gleaming like gold, and flowers like a blazing fire. Ceaselessly moving their stems and leaves, the the ground itself was of the finest sand, but blue as a sapphire flame. Down there, a strange blue mist enveloped everything. You would have thought you were standing high in the air with only the sky above and beneath you, and not down in the depths of the ocean. When the surface was dead calm, you could just faintly perceive the sun, looking like a crimson flower from which streamed a flood of light. Each of the small princesses had her little plot in the garden where she could dig and plant as she liked. One of them gave her flower beds to shape the shape of a whale. Another thought it nicer to have hers formed like a mermaid, but the youngest made hers as round as the sun and used only flowers as red as the sun itself. She was a strange child, quiet and pensive, and while the other sisters decorated their gardens with all kinds of extraordinary things that they had taken from the sunken ships, she would have nothing in hers but beautiful statue and her red flowers. It was the statue of a handsome boy, in the purest white marble, that had sunk to the bottom of the sea after a shipwreck. Next to the statue she planted a rose-red weeping willow, which grew splendidly and shaded the statue with its delicate branches. Nothing gave the youngest princess greater pleasure than to hear about the world of human beings up above. She made her grandmother tell her all she knew about the ships, the towns, the peoples, and the animals. But what fascinated her beyond words was the flowers on the earth were scented, while those at the bottom of the sea were not. That the woods were green, and that the fishes once saw among the branches could sing so loudly and sweetly that it was a delight to hear them. Grandmother called to the little birds of the air fishes, because otherwise the mermaids would not have understood her, for they had never seen a bird. As soon as you are 15, said the grandmother, you will be allowed to rise up above the water and sit on the rocks in the moonlight to watch the big ships sail by. The following year, the eldest sister was to have her 15th birthday. But as there was 1 year between each of them, the youngest still had 5 whole years to wait before her turn came to see what things are like on the earth. And the very one who had the longest time to wait was the most curious of all of them. Many a night she stood by the open window and looked up through the dark blue sky where the fishes were lashing the water with their fins and tails. She could just perceive the moon and the stars, though their light was very faint. But through the water they looked much bigger than they did to us, and if something like a black cloud passed under them, she knew that it was either a whale swimming above her or a ship with many people on board. They probably never dreamed that a lovely little mermaid was standing below, raising her white hands towards the keel of the ship. The eldest princess had now reached her 15th birthday and was allowed to rise up to the surface. When she came back, she had hundreds of things to tell the others, but the most wonderful of all, she said, was to lie in the moonlight on a sand bank in the calm sea, gazing at the huge town close to the shore, where the lights twinkled like hundreds of stars, to listen to the music and to the church bells, and to the noise that stirs of the carriages and the people. But just because she could not get there, that was the very little thing the mermaid longed to do most of all. Oh, how eagerly the youngest sister listened, and whenever after this she stood at the open window in the evening looking up through the deep blue sea, she thought of the giant town, with its noise and its bustles, and seemed to her the sights and the sounds of the bells coming right down to her. The following year, the second sister was allowed to rise up through the waters and through the waves. She reached the surface just at sunset, and that sight was the most magnificent she had ever seen. The heavens looked like liquid gold, she told them, and the clouds, well, she never tired of describing their beauty. The rosy red and the velvet and the violets, as they sailed over her, faster than the clouds, like the long white veil flung out towards the sea. A flock of wild swans flew away over the water beyond which the sun was setting. The swan towards the sun, but it sank, and the rosy tint faded away from the sky and the sea of the clouds. The year after that, the third sister went up. She was the most daring of them, so she swam up to the broad river, which floated into the ocean. She saw beautiful green hills and vineyards placed, and farms were faintly visible among the splendid forest. In a tiny cove she found a crowd of little human children, splashing about quite naked. She wanted to play with them, but she gave them a fright, and they ran away. Then came a little black animal. It was a dog, but she had never seen one before. It barked at her and so fiercely that she was frightened and took refuge into the open sea. But she could never forget the beautiful woods, the green hills, and the lovely children who could swim in the water, although they had no fish's tails. The fourth sister was not so daring. She remained far out in the stormy ocean and told her sisters that staying there was the best part of her adventure. You could see for miles and miles around, and the sky above was like a giant glass dome. She had seen ships, only far, far, far away. They looked like seagulls. The amusing dolphins had turned somersaults, and the gigantic whales had spouted water through their nostrils, given the effect of hundreds of fountains playing. Now it was the turn of the fifth sister. Her birthday happened to be in the winter, so she saw things which none of the others had seen when they first went up to the surface. The sea was quite green, and large icebergs were floating about. They looked like pearls, she said. They appeared in the most wonderful shapes and sprinkled like diamonds. And sparkled like diamonds. She sat down on one of the largest, and every ship gave it a wide berth. With the sailors saw her sitting there with her long hair floating in the water. Late in the evening, the sky became overcast. Thunder crashed, and the lightning stabled the sky. While the dark black waves lifted the huge icebergs high up on their crest. The sails were F-U-R-L-E-D. Furled? Sails were furled on all the ships, and sailors stood in fear and trembling. But she sat quietly on her floating iceberg, watching the blue lightning flash in zigzags down into the shining sea. The first time the sister rose above the water, they were all delighted with the new and beautiful things they had seen. But as they were now grown up and were allowed to go up to the surface whenever they liked, They lost interest in it. They longed for their home, and after a month had gone by, each said that no place was more delightful than the bottom of the sea. Besides, one felt so comfortable at home there. Many an evening, the five sisters would appear on the surface, arm in arm. They had beautiful voices, more beautiful than those of the human beings. And when storms threatened to wreck the ships, the mermaids would swim in front of them. They sang their most seductive songs of the wanderers in the depth of the sea and tried to persuade the people not to be afraid of coming down to them. But the seafarers could not understand them. They thought it was the storm they heard, nor did they ever see the promised splendors, for when the ship sank they drowned, and never reached the palace of the Sea King alive. At night, when the sisters rose up through the waves, the youngest remained behind quite alone, gazing after them. She would have wept, but a mermaid has no tears, and so she suffers all the more. "Oh, if I were only 15," she said, "I know I shall love the upper world." At last she too reached the age of 15. When now we are getting you off Well, now we are getting you off our hands," said her grandmother, the old Doric queen. "Come here, let me dress you up like your sisters." And she put a wreath of white lilies on her head, but each petal was formed of half a pearl. Then the old queen made 8 large oysters, fasten themselves to the princess's tail, to show her high rank. "Oh, how it hurts," said the little mermaid. "Well, one must suffer to be beautiful," declared her grandmother. The youngest mermaid, would gladly have shaken off all the fineries and laid aside the heavy wreath. The red flowers in her grander suit grander suited her in her grand in her the red flowers in her garden suited her much better, but she did not dare to change. "Goodbye, goodbye," she said, and she rose up through the waters. The sun had just set when her head appeared above the surface, but the clouds were very still, tinted with rose and gold, and in the pink flushed sky, the evening star twinkled bright and clear. The air was mild and fresh, and the sea dead calm. She saw a big 3-masted ship, with only a single sail set, for not a breath of wind stirred, and sailors were sitting on the rigging. She heard music and singing on board the ship. And in the darkness was glittering and gathering, hundreds of colored lanterns were lighted. They looked like the flags of every nation waving in the air. The little mermaid swam right up to the porthole of the cabin, and every time the swell lifted her, she could see crowds of people in the evening dress. By the handsomest of all was a young prince with a great coal black eyes. He could hardly have been more than 16 years old. It was his birthday, and that was the reason for the party. The sailors danced on deck, and when the prince appeared among them, hundreds of rockets shot up into the air, turning night into day and frightening the little mermaid so much that she had to dive under the water. But she soon ventured to put her head up again, and it looked as if all the stars were falling down to her from the sky. Never had she seen such a display. It was so light on board ship that one could see every rope, to say nothing of the people. Oh, how handsome the young prince was, laughing and smiling while the music rang in the beauty of the night. It got quite late But the little mermaid could not turn her eyes away from the ship and the beautiful prince. The colored lanterns were put up, no more rockets shot up through the air, no more guns were fired, but deep down in the sea there was a dull hammering and rumbling. The water was lifting up and down so that she could look into the cabin. But the ship started to move, sail after sail opened to the wind, the waves grew mightier, great clouds gathered, the lightning flashed among the horizon. Oh, there were terrible weather ahead. So the sailors furloughed their ships. The great ship plowed on, pitching and tossing in the angry sea. Waves like enormous black mountains were thundering to crash down upon the mast. But the ship disappeared like a swan in the tuft of the sea of the waves, and was lifted again the next moment to the top of their towering crests. The ship cracked and groaned, the thick planks cracked under the bows of the waves, and the mast broke into two like a reed, and the ship rolled over so far on one side the water rushed into the hold. Then the little mermaid saw that the people were in peril, while she herself was to beware of the beams and the pieces of the wreck which were floating about in the sea. At the moment it was pitch dark, and she could see nothing at all. Then there came a flash of light which lit up everything on board. She looked perilously for the young prince, and when the ship split apart she saw him sink into the sea. Her first impulse was one of joy because he was coming down to her, but then she remembered that human beings could not live under the water, and that he could not come alive down to her father's palace. No, die he must not. So she swam in among the drift beams and planks, quite forgetting that they might crush her. She dived deep into the sea, rose up again among the waves, and at last reached the young prince, who could hardly keep on swimming in the stormy ocean. His arms and legs were beginning to fail him. His beautiful eyes were closing. He would have died had not the mermaid been there. She held his head above the water and let the waves carry her with him whenever they pleased. At dawn the storm was over. Not a trace of the ship was to be seen. The sun rose red and shining out of the water, and seemed to bring life and color back into the prince's cheeks. But his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his high, noble brow and stroked back his wet hair. She thought he looked like a marble statue down in her little garden. She kissed him again and wished for the bottom of her heart that he might live. In front of her she saw land with snow-capped mountains in a distance, near the shoreline were glorious green forests, and close by was a church or a convent. She could not be certain just what it was. Lemon and orange trees grew in the garden, and outside the gates were tall palm trees. There the sea had formed a cove where the fine white sand had been washed up. She swam towards it with the handsome prince, and laid him on the sand, with his head turned to the warm rays of the sun. Then the bells rang out from the white building, and a group of young girls came through the garden. The little mermaid swam further out to hide behind some of the rocks, covering her hair and her breast with sea foam, so that no one could catch sight of her face, and then kept watch to see who would come to rescue the poor shipwrecked prince. It was not long before one of the young girls arrived. For a moment she seemed quite frightened, but she ran for help, and the princess saw the prince come to and smile at those who stood around him. But he did not smile at her far out in the sea, for he did not know that she had saved him. She felt very sad, and when he was carried into the great building, she dived sorrowfully down into the depths of the water and returned to her father's palace. There her sisters asked what she had seen, and on her first visit to the surface, but she would tell them nothing. Many an evening and many a morning she rose up to the place where she had left the prince. She saw how the fruit of the garden ripened and was gathered, and how the snow melted on the distant mountains. But she never saw the prince, so she would return home sadder than before. Her only conciliation was to sit on her little garden and throw her arms around the beautiful marble statue, which was so like him. She neglected her flowers, and they grew into the wilderness all over the paths, and wove their long stems and leaves in and out of the branches of the trees until the whole palace was shrouded in darkness. When she could endure it no longer, she confided in one of her sisters, and at once the others knew about it, but nobody else. At once the others knew about it, but nobody else except for a few more mermaids was told, just their most intimate friends. One of them knew who the prince was. She too had seen the party held in his honor and heard where his kingdom lay. Come, little sister, said the other princess, and with their arms about each other's shoulders, they rose in a long line up through the water opposed the place where they knew the prince's palace stood. It was built of a kind of pale yellow stone, with a great flash of marble steps leading down to the sea. Splendid glittering corpels were seen above the roof, and in between the pillars surrounding the whole building stood marble statues which looked as if they were alive. Through the clear glass water one looked into the magnificent hall where costly silk curtains and tapestries were hung, and where all the walls were covered with large paintings. In the middle of the biggest hall, a great fortune was playing, its jets soaring high up towards the glass dome through which the sun shone down upon the water and upon the beautiful plants growing in the great basin. Now she knew where he lived, as many an evening and many a night she haunted the palace. She swam much closer to land than any of her sisters had dared to do, and she even went up to the narrow creek running under the splendid balcony which cast its long shadow upon the water. Here she would sit and gaze at the young prince, who thought he was quite alone in the bright moonlight. So it's like a Romeo and Juliet story, baby. Look at, there's the princess, right? There's the Princess Mermaid, and there's the prince. Often in the evening she saw him sailing to the sound of the music in the splendid new ship with waving flags. She peeped through the reeds as if the wind caught her long silver white veil, though who saw it through it was a swan spreading its wings. Many a night she heard the fishermen pressing the young prince, and she rejoiced that she had saved his life. She thought how closely his head had rested on her bosom, and how lovely she had kissed him, though he knew nothing about it, and could not even dream of her. She became more and more fond of human beings, and more did she long to be among them. Their world seemed much larger than her own. They were able to fly over the sea in ships and climb the lofty mountains. The lands they possessed stretched further than the eye could see, and could reach. There was so much she wanted to know, but her sisters could not answer all her questions, so she asked her grandmother, who knew so well the upper world, as she rightly called the countries above the sea. If human beings aren't drowned, asked the little mermaid, could they live forever? Don't they die as we do down here in the depths of the sea? Yes, answered the old lady, they must die too, and their lifetime is even shorter than ours. We can live to be 300 years old, but when we cease to exist, we turn to foam on the water, and so we don't even have a grave down here among our dear ones. We have no immortal souls. We never have another life. We are like the green weeds. Once it is cut, it never grows again. Human beings, on the contrary, have a soul which lives forever, which lives after the body has turned to dust. It rises up through the liquid air upon the shining stars, just as we rose out of the water and see the countries of the earth. So do they rise up to unknown beautiful regions which we shall never be able to see. Why were we not granted an immortal soul? Asked the little mermaid in a melancholy voice. I know that I would gladly give the 300 years I have to live if I could be a human being for only one single day, and then have some parts of the heavenly world. You must not brood over that, said the grandmother. We have a much happier life than the people up there. I am fated to die and float like foam upon the sea. Can I do nothing to win an immortal soul? No, answered the old lady. That could only happen if a human being held you so dear that you were more to him than father and mother. Oh, so if she gets married to a human. It's because a human being held her so dear that she were more to him than the father and the mother. If he loved you with all his heart and soul, and if his right hand were joined to yours by a monk, with the promise to be faithful to you here and in all eternity, then his soul will pass into your body, and you would have to share in the happiness of mankind. He would give you a soul, and you retain his own, and yet retain his own. But that can never happen. The very thing that is considered beautiful here to the sea, your fishtail, is considered ugly on the earth. People have very poor judgment indeed. They have two clumsy supports, which they call legs, and think them beautiful. Then the little mermaid sighed and looked sadly at her fish's tail. Come, let us be happy, said her grandmother. Let us leap and jump about during the 300 years we have to live. That seems a far enough amount of time. After that you can rest the more merrily. Tonight we are going to a court ball. Truly, it was a magnificent affair, such as one never sees on earth. The walls and ceilings of the great ballroom were made of thick, transparent glass. In rows on each side stood several hundred gigantic cells, rose red and grass green. A blue fire was burning on each. They lit up the entire room, and shining through the walls, lit up the sea as well. Immovable fish, great and small, should be seen swimming near the glass walls. Some had scales gleaming scarlet, while others shone just like silver and gold. Down through the middle of the hall there floated a broad stream on which the merman and mermaid danced to their own beautiful singing. No voice such as theirs are ever heard among people of the earth. The little mermaid sang more beautiful than anyone else. Everyone applauded her, and for the moment her heart was filled with joy, for she knew she had the loveliest voice of all. on the earth or on the sea. But she could not forget the handsome prince, nor her sorrow at not having an immortal soul. Alright, baby cakes. I'm going to finish reading this to you tomorrow. This is actually a really long book. I didn't know it was this long, so this is going to be piecemeal. Oh my gosh. Alright, so we are on page 235. We're on The Little Mermaid, and I just want you to know how much I love you. Let's sing. Lila Tove, and good night to you. Lila Tove, may your dreams come true. We sing Lila Tove, may Israel protect you throughout the night until we reach the morning light. Karina, baby, I love you and I miss you and I can't wait to see you and I can't wait to hold you, and I'm sorry that life is hard and it's complicated and it's not fair. Mama learned this from a very young age. You've learned this from a very young age. I just wanted something better for you. I really, really did. I didn't want to repeat of my childhood. And yeah, cycles are cycles and they repeat themselves. Mama's trying to do better. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You deserve to be treated like gold. You are absolutely perfect. You're brilliant. You have a good heart. And you deserve to be treated like gold. And when you get older, I want you to find someone who loves you no matter what. Unconditional love no matter what. Because you deserve to be treated like that. Because you are my princess daughter. Right? And I love you so immensely that I want you to find someone who loves you. So immensely too. And just like in The Little Mermaid, find someone who holds you more dear than anyone else. I love you, baby. And like Papa always used to say, Mama's Papa's son, Papa's my moon, and you are a rainbow baby. You are quite literally a rainbow baby, and we both love you no matter what. I love you, honey. Have a good day. I love you.